courtroom, defendant's present in court with counsel. Anything the record for the state?
No, Your Honor.
Anything for the record for the defendant?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
We may invite the jury in. Witness with the state.
Sergeant Lilliquist, some of the video recording was sometimes difficult to hear. I will. Some of the video recording was sometimes difficult to hear, wasn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Essentially, what is it that Rachel Lopez told you during the course of that interview that her mother said about where Jose was?
Rachel said that her mother told her that she had dropped her off at her AA sponsor's house, Fred.
And what was Fred supposed to do with Jose?
Supposed to take him to the airport the following morning to attend rehab in Florida.
Now, you had also asked Rachel Lopez to write out a statement at the end of the recording that we saw.
Yes, ma'am.
And did anything else happen in that room other than what we saw?
The only thing that additionally happened was I returned in after she completed her statement. I had her to sign it, date it, with the time.
And did you then take it from her?
Yes, ma'am.
May I approach the witness?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 50. Could you identify that for me and tell me how you know what it is?
Yes, ma'am. This is a written statement that Rachel provided me.
And has it been in a secure custody of a Wake County Sheriff's officer since it was written?
Yes, ma'am.
Has it been altered in any way, edited, anything done to it?
No, ma'am.
Your Honor, the State would offer into evidence State's Exhibit 50.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Motion to introduce and evidence allowed.
And I would ask that it be published to the jury. I have 13 copies.
Ladies and gentlemen, State's Exhibit number 50, a copy of that will be distributed among you. You should view this carefully, individually, and without comment. When you have finished reading it, if you will pass it forward, that's how we'll know that you're through. And you can pass it to either side, however Madam Sheriff directs.
Sergeant Lilliquist, could you look at page 3 on the original document that was written by Ms. Lopez? And there are some notes off to the left-hand side. Could you read those for us?
Yes, ma'am. It states, during this convo, my mom knocked on my door. I asked her where was Jose, and she said she took him to his sponsor's house. I also told her I wanted to call the police, but she said, no, it's okay, he's not coming here. And below that it says, another woman from church.
Is that a continuation of a sentence where she said, I called Miss Debbie Medlin?
Yes, ma'am.
I have no other questions.
Witness with the defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Sergeant Lilliquist.
Good afternoon, sir.
All right. I just have a few questions for you. When Rachel got to the house, were you already there?
No, sir.
Okay. And do you know anything about who all was at the house at the point in time that you got there, to the best of your recollection?
As far as investigators or
Both.
everybody?
Everybody.
Investigator Weaver was there. I believe Investigator Gay was there. And the only interaction I had was with Rachel.
Okay. And did Investigator Weaver assign you to Rachel, talking to Rachel and taking her back to the station?
Well, yes.
And is it your information that Rachel had arrived, I guess, after police were already there?
Yes, sir.
And it was your information that they kept Rachel separated, so there wasn't any communication between Rachel and her mom and her sister, the people that they already had there.
Rachel was apart from everybody else when
She
I had
was apart
interaction
from
with.
everybody else. And as far as your talking to and investigation went, as far as you know, and as far as Ms. Lopez's statement say, that Rachel left early that morning and was just getting back to the house whenever she ended up coming down to the police station with you.
That's correct.
And I'm sure you've done countless interviews at this point in time in your career.
Yes, sir.
And you've had people be reluctant or just outright say, no, I'm not talking to you, and then people that are cooperative with you.
That's correct.
And from looking at this video, it appears that Ms. Lopez was completely cooperative with you.
Absolutely.
And I think you complimented her on her and said, I think you're being forthright, and you didn't see any indications that she was leading you on or hiding anything or anything like that.
That's correct.
And in addition to that, another thing that police typically do is try to get the person to put the story in their own words, because during the interview, you're leading the discussion.
Well, I don't know about leading, but
Leading is I understand what you're saying. You're asking the questions and having her tell you what happened.
That's correct.
You're not putting words in her mouth like we consider leading questions to be.
No,
but you are just asking questions and getting information. And then after you do that, you would like to have the person, the interviewee, put the story in their own words again after they have talked to you.
That's correct.
And that's what Ms. Lopez did in this situation.
That is correct.
And I'm sure you've had people saying, no, I'm not writing anything, or just write down a little bit of something, or not write anything at all. But it appears that Ms. Lopez wrote down a good amount, and it was substantially similar to the things that she had told you in her actual interview, correct?
It was similar.
And I guess some details may be different. I think she even went back and I guess she had left stuff out, and when we're looking at page 3, add this to the side. So it appears that she was trying to give you a complete narrative as you requested.
That's correct.
And like Ms. Shendel said, some things from the video aren't clear, so I will just go over those just to make sure that everyone is aware, that the court is aware. When you were talking to Ms. Lopez, both on the recorded statement and in her written statement, she did get a communication from her mother informing Rachel that she was going to be asking Jose to leave.
That's correct.
And she said she got that call, I guess, early in the morning, about 7:30, and I guess your report, and maybe around 8 o'clock in her written report, but sometime early in the morning.
Yes, sir.
And that was while her mom was on the way to South Carolina to see family.
That's correct.
And she had informed them at that point in time that she was going to be asking Jose to leave whenever she got home.
That's correct.
and she wanted her, Rachel, to kind of stay out of the house or stay away because she was going to ask Jose to leave, and she anticipated that it was going to get loud.
Yes, sir.
And she also indicated to you that she, I guess presuming that mom had returned from South Carolina sometime in the afternoon, and she heard her mom in the house for about 10 minutes before she hears a car leave. And we're assuming that, I think you had talked about it, Jose, no one else was in the house except for her grandfather.
That's correct.
So Jose had left, and presumably with Miss Madonna.
That's correct.
And then Miss Madonna came back at around 9 o'clock that afternoon, 9 o'clock that night, and that's when Rachel comes down and starts talking to her for the first time that day.
Yes, sir.
Or talking to her personally for the first time that day.
Yes, sir.
And she mentioned that she observed her mom to be extremely sweaty, and she had, according to your report, cuts on her left arm that were bleeding. Correct?
That's correct.
At this point in time, it was fairly early, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's fairly early in this investigation.
That's true.
And Rachel only knew what she knew, but had not been able to communicate with her mother once the police were involved and once the police were at the house.
She did not make any communication to my knowledge.
And assuming the investigation was also early on for you, so you didn't have a lot of detail, so you were just asking her questions and trying to have her fill in to the best of her knowledge.
That's correct.
In her interviews, in her letter, she said that her mother was, I guess, ending everything because she believed Jose was drinking and cheating on her, and they had issues with money, correct?
That's true.
And I guess they had talked about how did Miss Madonna know that Jose was drinking. She said she had seen liquor bottles and then smelled liquor on him before.
That's correct.
And then, like Ms. Shandles mentioned, Miss Madonna did say something about Jose or dropping him off to stay with a sponsor, and that he was going back to Florida, correct?
That's correct.
And Rachel said that she tried to tell her mom to call the police, correct?
Correct.
And her mom responded that everything was going to be okay, that Jose wasn't coming back to the house.
That's correct.
And Rachel also talked some about Jose. She had at least known or seen in the car that Jose carried a pocket knife in his car.
That's correct.
No regret.
Thanks, sir. You can stand down. You object to him being released from his subpoena?
No, Your Honor.
Pat?
No, Your Honor. Thank you, Sergeant.
Further evidence on behalf of the state?
Yes, Your Honor. The state would call Charles Pritchard. Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right, please. You solemnly swear testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you, sir. Have a seat, please. Or may I approach?
Yes, ma'am. Finish with state.
Thank you. Sir, if you would, please state your name for the court.
Charles Walter Pritchard.
Okay, and Mr. Pritchard, I'm going to ask that you speak up so that everyone can hear you. Do you go by Charles, or what are your friends called?
Chuck.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pritchard, how are you currently employed?
I work at a private school as a
Okay.
head chef.
And how long have you worked in that capacity?
You mean in the food service business, or right?
At the school, and again, if you could speak up and maybe move the microphone.
At the school,
Right, yes, in your current position.
8 years.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Staten Island, New York. I was born there.
And when did you move down to North Carolina?
2000. I'm not sure. It was probably 9 years, maybe.
9 years
wait,
ago?
It was 2007 or 2008.
Okay. I'm going to ask you again, I'm sorry, I know it can be difficult. If you can adjust that microphone however you need to
Sure.
make yourself comfortable. If you need to pull it towards you, the
Okay.
top part, you can. And what brought you to North Carolina?
My ex-wife,
And who is,
Joanna Madonna.
and that's the defendant in this case, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell us how you and the defendant first met.
At a diner upstate New York,
And where?
West Taconic Diner.
Okay, so tell us about when y'all first met, how that came about.
She walked into the diner and I kind of had eyes for her, and we started talking.
And how long after you first met her did you marry?
Probably less than a year.
Okay. And at the time when you got married, were you living there in upstate New York?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And who lived with you and Miss Madonna in upstate New York?
I was living alone. I think I had my son at the time.
Right. And once y'all got married, did her daughter, Rachel and Michelle?
When I moved downstate, yes, I lived in their house.
Okay. And so when you first met, was she living downstate New York and you were in upstate New York?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And y'all married within about a year of meeting each other?
Yes.
At which time you moved, what part of,
Well, I was
what
6.
town in New York?
Thornwood.
Okay. And how long did you live there prior to moving to North Carolina?
Probably 2 years, maybe 3. It could have been 3 years.
At some point, did you and the defendant have a child?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that child's name?
Isabel?
Okay. And how old is Isabel?
Right now she's currently 10.
And do you currently have custody?
Yes,
Isabel?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. And were you still living in New York at the time that Isabel was born?
Yes, ma'am.
What, if any, problems or complications were there with Isabel when she was born?
First, I know there was none until she got a little older.
Okay, and tell us about that.
She's autistic, high function.
All right, and how old was she when her autism was
I
diagnosed?
believe she was 3 or 4.
And was that when y'all were living here by then?
Yes.
What made you decide to come down to North Carolina?
Better life, cheaper.
Tell us a little bit about where you were working when y'all were living in downstate New York.
I was working for Dolce, a company, when I moved in with my ex-wife.
And what kind of work was that you were doing?
That was chef.
Okay. How long have you been a chef total?
Almost 30 years, 85, I think.
And was the defendant working when you got married?
Yes, ma'am.
And what type of work did she do?
She was a teacher.
And how long there in New York did she teach? Did she teach the entire time that y'all lived there?
Up until she was pregnant with Isabel.
And how long after you were married did she become pregnant?
Probably, I think the second year.
And once she stopped working, did y'all have financial stresses in the marriage?
Somewhat.
Can you tell us a little bit about those?
It was just hard to keep up with just one paycheck.
Did there come a time when you separated out your account from that of your ex-rival defendant?
Yes.
And why did you do that?
There was too much overdrafts every month.
And when you say there are too much overdrafts, give us an example.
They could be 200 to 300 a month in overdrafts.
200 to 300 in overdraft fees during a month?
Yes.
And was that because of the way in which the defendant was managing finances within the house?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember once you moved down here, where did y'all move exactly in Wake County?
Roseville.
And did you buy a house in Roseville or were you renting?
We bought a house.
And where did the money to buy that house come from?
Joanna's father.
And so when you moved down here, who all moved down here to live with you in that house?
It was ex-wife, grandfather, and the two daughters, Michelle and Rachel, and Isabel.
And Isabel was how old at that time?
I would say she was 5, maybe.
When you came down to North Carolina, did Isabel enroll in school at that time?
No, I think she was not old enough to go to school yet.
At some point, though, she started in school. Is that right?
Yes.
As part of her autism, tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that she has faced.
She can't, sometimes she just can't tell you her feelings, or she would have meltdowns in school, be a little, I guess, hit the teachers. She would just have meltdowns.
And in order to help her with those things, what kinds of efforts did y'all make?
Well, mostly my ex-wife did most of that because she was a teacher. But now it's been a challenge, and she needs therapy, and we're getting therapy now the last few years.
And how long ago was she receiving therapy or some kind of therapy while you and the defendant were still married?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. Do you remember when she first started receiving some kind of therapy or counseling?
I can't recall. I can't recall the year or.
Is she currently living with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if she was receiving any kind of therapy or in-home services prior to living with you?
She was, but Medicaid kind of cut it off since I took over.
Is she currently on your health insurance?
Yes.
And what kinds of things does your health insurance cover for her?
Doesn't cover her expenses at all, any of her mental health or anything like that.
And so, is she on an insurance that does provide coverage for mental health and in-home services?
Yes.
And therapy?
Yes.
And what is that?
Champ VA.
Okay. And I think you said Champ VA?
Yes.
And is that through the victim in this case, is Mr. Perez?
Yes, ma'am.
Veteran benefits?
Yes.
And do you know when she got access to those benefits? How long ago that was?
I'm not sure. She could have been on it. Well, Isabel's always been on my health insurance since I started this job that I had 8 years. So I'm not sure when she started Champ VA.
Would it have been prior to her coming to live with you? When she came to live with you in June of 2013, she was already on it. Is that accurate?
Yes, and also she was on Medicaid, but they after I went to court for the stop payment on child support, they cut it off then, Medicaid.
And so right now, she continues on the Champ VA benefit health insurance and on your health insurance.
Yes.
Health insurance doesn't pay any of the mental health and treatment costs.
No, they'll pay some, but not all.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about once y'all came down here to North Carolina, living in Rollsville. At some point, did you and the defendant, Ms. Madonna, start to have some problems in your marriage?
Yes.
And tell us about those.
They were towards the end. I guess jealousy with my part. Yeah, it was jealousy.
Okay, and what, sir, was it that you were jealous about?
Joanna's flirting, I guess. I can't. I'm not sure. I'm not.
And how long, if you remember, did you all live down here before you made the decision to separate?
We separated in 2008.
And do you remember what month in 2008 that was?
I believe, I'm thinking April or fall maybe. I know it's a year before you can divorce, but
And
I
when
know.
did y'all actually divorce?
2009 of March,
March
I
of
believe.
2009?
Or before that.
Okay. And whose idea was it to separate?
My ex-wife.
And when you say your ex-wife, you mean the defendant in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
And did she ask you to move out?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Subsequent to you moving out, did someone else move into their house, into her house?
Yes, ma'am.
And who was that?
That was Jose.
And that, when you say Jose, the victim, Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Okay. And how long after you moved out did he move into the house?
I'm not positive. It could have been that week.
Okay. And so was it fairly quickly, within a couple of days or a week of you having moved out, of her asking you to leave?
Could have been a week to. It could have been a week.
Did that come as a surprise to you?
Yes. Well, yeah. Yes. Yes.
Had you known them to be spending time together prior?
I think they were going to AA meetings together.
Okay. And during that time, how long were you aware that he and she had been attending some meetings together prior to her asking you to move out?
I think a few weeks.
Once you separated from the defendant, tell us about the arrangement you had in regards to your daughter, Isabel.
That I would see her every week or anytime I wanted to.
Okay. And so when did you see her? How often were you seeing her
Uh,
in that separation?
Once a week on the weekends, and anytime I had time off from the school.
And when you would see her on the weekends, how would you work out getting her?
Most of the time, Jose would drop her off.
And where would Mr. Perez drop her off?
The Triangle, across from the Triangle Mall at a dollar store.
Okay. And was that dollar store something that was kind of halfway between where you lived and where they lived?
Yes, ma'am.
And where is it that you were living when you moved out?
At first I was living at Coleridge Courts. I'm not sure whereabouts. It's close by there.
And so that was a convenient place for y'all to meet?
For me, yes.
Right, okay. And would he generally bring her on a Friday to drop her off?
Yes, right after work.
And then you would take her back there on Sunday?
Yes, ma'am.
And would you say that he was responsible for meeting you 90% of the time? I mean,
I can't recall, but most of the time it was Jose that brought her to me.
did you ever get opportunity to kind of observe Jose, the victim, Mr. Perez, and Isabel interacting?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
They seem fine together. Yeah, they just seemed fine together, and they would joke around when, they would be at inside the dollar store. I would meet them in there sometimes.
Did he seem to have patience with her
Yes, ma'am.
and be kind to her?
Yes, ma'am.
And had developed a relationship, father-like relationship with her?
Yes.
And how about you and Jose? How did y'all get along?
We got along. I didn't talk to him too much, but, it's still a little uncomfortable,
And when you say a little uncomfortable, is that because he had moved in with your wife within a week of you having left?
Yes, ma'am.
And so did you ever talk to him about the defendant in this case? Did you ask many questions about their relationship?
No.
Did you ever have occasion to have him talk to you about their relationship?
He did call me one time.
And tell us about that.
He called me. He was a little upset because Joanna wanted to take this man down to New York, and he was upset about that.
And what kind of reaction or position did you take as to hearing about their personal?
I really didn't want to hear it because it was kind of none of my business. So I tried to stay out of it as much as possible.
Did you, on occasions during the time that you were separated from your wife, were there times when the defendant came to meet you to bring Isabel?
Yes.
Did she ever try to talk to you about the victim, Mr. Perez?
No.
Or
No.
express any concern about him or their relationship?
No.
Did you at some point, did you become aware of Mr. Perez and the defendant actually marrying?
No, I didn't know pretty much anything about it.
Okay. But you knew that they did in fact get married. You may not have known when, but at some point
Yes.
they married each other. Do you know whether Isabel was at that wedding?
No.
No, she wasn't, or no, you don't know?
No, I don't know.
Okay. What kind of child support arrangement did you have with the defendant during the time that Isabel was living with Mr. Perez and the defendant?
It was through the court system.
And how much were you paying?
50 weekly.
$50 a week. And are you currently paying anything in child support?
No, ma'am.
And is that because Isabel is now living with you full-time?
Yes, ma'am.
And when did she start living with you full-time?
the weekend of Father's Day, 2013.
Let's turn our attention to that weekend. Was that a weekend when you had Isabel for the weekend?
Yes, ma'am.
And had you gotten Isabel on that Friday, which I believe would have been June 14th, 2013?
Yes, ma'am.
And from whom had you gotten Isabel that day?
I believe it was Jose.
Okay, and was it kind of like y'all were used to doing, meeting there at the dollar store?
Yes,
Your
ma'am.
triangle? Okay. And had you and Isabel spent the weekend together then?
Yes, ma'am.
At some point, was the plan for you to reconnect with Jose, to get Isabel back?
It was either Mom or Jose, but that weekend it was Mom.
Okay. And so you knew that you would be meeting the defendant on Sunday afternoon?
I didn't know until probably that Sunday.
Okay. Did you, at some point on that Sunday morning, hear from the defendant?
I believe so. I believe she called.
And do you remember what was it that she told you that day in terms of getting Isabel?
That Jose moved out, and I believe he moved to Florida, and don't tell Isabel.
And was there a reason why the defendant indicated that she did not want Isabel to know that Jose had moved out and gone to Florida?
I think because Isabel would have been upset.
Did the defendant give you any other information regarding what had happened with Jose?
No, ma'am.
So after that, did you in fact make arrangement to meet the defendant?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me about that. What time did you meet
I
for Isabel back?
I believe it was probably between 11 and 2.
11 a.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
And that would have been on Sunday, June 16th?
Yes, ma'am.
And where did you meet?
At that dollar store.
Okay. And what car did the defendant, if you know, arrive in?
In the Mercedes.
Okay, when you say the Mercedes, was that a car she owned?
Yes, ma'am.
And a white Mercedes? Do you remember?
I'm not sure if it was gray or white. I don't remember.
When she got there, tell us kind of how that exchange took place.
I just kind of didn't say too much to Joanna. Put her in the back seat, I believe, and that's pretty much it.
And when you say you put her in the back seat, you mean Isabel?
Yes.
And transferred her bag into the car?
Yes.
Okay. And so on doing that, did you have occasion to observe the defendant?
No, ma'am. Not that much.
Okay.
I
So
didn't.
she was in the front driver's seat? Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes, ma'am.
Was there any reason why y'all didn't talk at that point?
Nope. We didn't exchange too many words. Just maybe goodbye, or I don't recall.
Was there anything in your mind at that time unusual about that exchange?
No, ma'am.
Is there anything that, drew your attention to the defendant or made you concerned about her?
No, ma'am.
After you'd done that, I assume you went back to your house and went on and started trying to get ready for your work week, right?
Yes.
At some point, did you receive a phone call that evening?
I believe so. It was probably late from the defendant. Around, I would say, 10 or 11, I'm not sure.
And what did you find out at that point?
That the police were there looking around.
Okay, and what, if anything, did she ask you to do?
I don't recall.
Okay, did there come a time when you needed to go and get Isabel?
Yes, ma'am.
And so did you go and do that Sunday evening, June 16th?
No, it was Monday.
Monday.
Her sister brought her to me.
Okay.
Michelle.
Which sister was that?
Michelle?
And has Isabel been with you since that Monday morning?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you at some point learn that Jose Perez had been murdered?
I believe my sponsor called me that morning and asked me if I was okay. I didn't know anything about it until that morning.
Okay, and so when Michelle had brought Isabel to you, was that before Michelle brought Isabel?
No, she just brought Isabel to me, and she didn't say anything about anything. So
She didn't explain to you why she was needing to bring Isabel?
no, it could have been the morning that I got a phone call from my sponsor, and he told me what had happened, and I could have gotten in touch with Michelle to bring Isabel to me, but I don't recall.
At some point that morning you became aware that Mr. Perez had died, and at some point that morning Isabel came to live with you and has been living with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you, after that point in time, did you end up being interviewed by an investigator who might have been investigating this?
I believe so, yes.
In that interview, in describing and talking about your marriage, if you had talked about one of the things that you felt like had created a problem in your marriage was you womanizing, what did you mean by that?
I'm not sure. I said something, and she threw a fork at me. I deserved it, but...
Let me back you up for just a minute. When you said something, you said she threw a fork at you. You mean the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was during the course while y'all were married?
Yes, ma'am.
And so, when you use the term womanizing, did you ever have any extramarital affairs outside of your marriage?
No, ma'am.
Currently, Isabel, how's she doing?
Well, she's doing better. It's been a struggle, kind of a long struggle.
How often is she receiving therapy now or in-home services?
Right now, 3 times a week, but it ends in a month. Those are free services that I'm receiving right now.
And they're free in that how have they been paid for?
Through the state.
And what, if any, other medical treatment or
No,
assistance?
she's been in quite a few, like Holly Hill and Strategic. That's been a struggle.
And in her being in Holly Hill and Strategic, have those been overnight hospitalizations?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And are those things, I think you mentioned earlier that your health insurance doesn't cover those things?
No.
And are those things that have been covered through Mr. Pritchard?
Still pending. Still pending.
If I could have one moment.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us exactly, if you know, what Holly Hill is and what
It's a
Strategic is.
psychiatric hospital, and also the other one I just mentioned. I'm sorry.
Strategic.
Yes.
Is it also for the treatment of juveniles or for young people? Minors?
Yes. They Isabel would have these meltdowns and said she wanted to kill herself or hurt others, and they always had me go get her assessed. But I know Isabel, and I knew she wouldn't, the Autism Society have stepped up, and they've been helpful and I don't have to get her accessed like that anymore. So that's about it.
And did some of the struggles in terms of autism and all that manifested itself prior to her coming to live with you?
It just seemed like it got worse the last school year.
We're glad she's doing better.
Yes.
Have you had opportunity, or have you received communication from the defendant since the time that Isabel came to live with you?
Yes.
Okay, and tell us about that.
Well, it would be phone calls. Probably mostly for Isabel. I mean, I didn't talk to her too much, the defendant, just because, Isabel wants to talk to her mom,
And what about written communications? Have you been getting?
Yes.
Okay, and have you read those?
Some, yes.
Okay. Do you know, or have you, I think I'll stop there. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Witness with defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Pritchard.
Hi.
You testified that you and Joanna had met in New York,
Yes,
that
ma'am.
you were a chef at the time.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you begin, 'cause you were different parts of New York at that time, correct? If I
Yeah,
understood the way
yes.
you testified.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you develop a relationship over a period of time through phone calls?
Over a period of time.
So you weren't always physically together during those early stages?
No, I think we used to visit each other on the weekends.
And so after some time of that long-distance relationship, you then moved in with Miss Madonna, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And I believe you said you were married in 2003? That's really-
It could have been 2004.
Okay. But around that time, you guys were married?
Yes, ma'am.
And around that time, I believe you referenced in your testimony earlier a sponsor. Are you yourself a recovering addict?
Yes, ma'am.
Would have it been around that time that you yourself was getting sober?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you still in sobriety now?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you said in 2005 you and Miss Madonna had Isabel.
2000. Yeah.
And you kind of gave some great detail about your early relationship with Miss Madonna in your married years. And it sounds like there were some stressors in the relationship. Is that correct?
Yes.
One of those you indicated were financial issues that you had.
Yes.
And I think you indicated that one of the reasons you moved down to North Carolina in 2007 was because of the high cost of living in New York.
Well, that was part. Yeah.
It was one of the factors that went into it.
Yes, ma'am.
You believed it'd be cheaper in North Carolina.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit more about the family. Do you have children from your previous marriage?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us about that?
I have a son, 22, I believe, and a daughter, 28.
And when you met Miss Madonna, were those children living with you at the time?
I believe my son was.
Did they come down to North Carolina when you moved here?
No, ma'am.
They stayed in New York?
Yes.
And you mentioned when you moved in with Joanna in New York that it was her father's home.
Yes, ma'am.
At that time, how was his health?
Fairly good. I stayed home after I worked at the diner, and was kind of like a stay-at-home dad for a little while.
Would he need caretaking or assistance in any way at that time?
Yes, somewhat.
And would Joanna assist with those things?
Yes.
And you described to us you finding out that around 3 or 4 that your daughter Isabel was autistic.
Yes, ma'am. I believe it was in North Carolina. I can't recall.
Is it fair to say that even before that diagnosis, you knew that there wasn't something quite right with her?
Yes, ma'am.
And she's pretty much had problems with that most of her life, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
North Carolina, was Joanna diagnosed with fibromyalgia? Do you recall that?
Yes.
How did that affect her in any way, if you
I don't know, she would get probably stressed out easily.
drowsy or
Yes.
things?
Yes.
When you moved down here, did either one of you have jobs at the time?
No, ma'am.
You kind of described having some financial issues even before moving down here. How were you able to pay for that? Subsidize that move to
Well,
North Carolina?
when we bought the house, after selling the other house, we kind of lived on that for a little while.
That would have been Miss Madonna's father's home?
Yes.
So you used the proceeds from the sale of that house to kind of fund the move and
Yes.
rent the current home you moved into when you came here?
We bought the house.
Oh, you bought it.
We bought it.
And you mentioned during your marriage that there were also some problems. You mentioned jealousy was an issue in the marriage.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you mean on your part or Miss Madonna's part? Explain that.
I would say,
Or is it pretty broad?
I'd just say most of my part, there's some on her part.
And you kind of categorize that as flirting kind of made you jealous.
Yes.
To your knowledge, did Miss Madonna ever cheat on you?
Not that I know of.
And you kind of referenced your own characteristics in the marriage as womanizing at times.
Womanizing, I wouldn't say that. I said something to that effect, probably. But I knew I deserved it. I don't recall what I said.
But you acknowledge that some of your own behaviors contributed to problems you had in the marriage.
Yes.
And you referenced something about Joanna throwing a fork at you during one of these encounters you had about the womanizing, or however you did.
Yeah, it was just, it wasn't, that I was worried or anything like that. I mean, I think the girls were around at the time and some friends, but it said something, I don't remember.
Was that the only time that you ever observed any behavior like that from her?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever seen Joanna, Miss Madonna, have a weapon, a gun of any kind?
No, ma'am.
To your knowledge, has she ever discussed with you wanting to own a weapon or have a weapon?
No, ma'am.
And you said shortly after your move to North Carolina, you both decided to separate, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you kind of jointly co-parented Isabel from that point forward, correct?
After, yes.
And Jose would also help facilitating that.
Yes.
But Joanna was involved with Isabel.
Yes.
She was living in her house and she was caring for her.
Yeah.
During the weeks she had her, and you would get her on the weekends.
Yes.
Would you say that your relationship was almost better after your divorce with Miss Madonna?
We had a common, we had a child, so, we had to talk, so.
But you guys were always cordial with each other?
Excuse me?
You were always cordial with each other?
Yes, ma'am.
mentioned that at some point after you moved to North Carolina, the relationship began to deteriorate even further.
Yes, ma'am.
Started to have more problems. Had you guys discussed separating immediately coming to North Carolina, or was it?
No, it was eventually. It was probably, yeah, it was eventually.
Would you say before you actually left the family home that you had been talking about a separation for some time, that past year?
No, not that I
How
can
long
recall.
did that was discussed before it ultimately happened, the separation?
We didn't discuss it. I can't recall either.
I don't want to limit you. Do you have any much more with him?
Probably a few questions, Judge, but if you want a break, we can.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our lunch and recess at this point. During this time, it is your duty not to talk among yourselves about this case. It's your duty not to talk to the parties, the witnesses, or the lawyers about anything at all. It's further duty not to talk to anyone else, to allow anyone else to talk with you, to say anything in your presence about this case. Avoid reading, watching, listening to accounts of this trial if there are any. Don't do any individual research or investigation on your own about any issue touching on this trial. And do not form or express an opinion about any issue in this trial during this time. That while everyone else court remains seated, I'm going to excuse the 13 of you and ask you to return and assemble in the jury room. This is at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We're going to recess early, about 3:30. So 2 o'clock this afternoon. That's your excuse.